All right. Thanks, Leanne. Rahab was a really dangerous woman. The wrong woman in the wrong place. We all basically know the story from Sunday school, right? So we're familiar with the basic how it works. But I think it's an incident that's got a lot to give, to speak to us about. I mean, first of all, it's a story which should never, ever, ever have happened. Think about the context, the book of Joshua, right? We're going into the promised land and we're getting rid of all the evil Canaanites. And the first thing God does is save a Canaanite woman. Not just a Canaanite woman, a prostitute. What a bizarre way to start a book where you're cleaning the land out of wicked Canaanites. It is totally contrary to expectations. Rahab was a dangerous woman, but she turns out to be faithful. So God can make faithful heroes of all of us, no matter what our background. The story is a bit of an invitation. It's also something of a warning. Every day we make a million decisions. We make planned decisions, we make snap decisions. What are we going to do? Are we going to take a chance on God? Are we going to go all in on Jesus? Because Rahab did. She had no plan B. When she committed to saving the spies, that was it. The bridges were burnt behind her. She'd made her decision. It was done. And her past became irrelevant when she made that decision. It was all about the future, only about the future. Our past can vanish in one decision. God's mercy is amazing. His grace is incredible. But we actually have to make a decision. And sometimes that can be a difficult decision, a dangerous decision. But we have to commit. And when we do, God's response is incredible. How many people here grew up with or have gone through the story of Robin Hood with their kids? Show of hands. Come on, fess up, all of you. What disgraceful parents and people you are. Absolutely terrible. We are used to reading stories with nuance, so let's get real about Robin Hood for a moment. Let's put faith to the side, we'll come back to that. Robin Hood was a freeloader. He murdered innocent merchants, stole their stuff, just killed them in the forest. They could have been good people, going home to their little kids to tuck them into bed. He just killed them with an arrow, not very comfortable, bad way to die. He rejected local and national authority. He was an anarchist, and he was loyal to the conveniently absent good King Richard. Oh yeah, good one. And a complete chauvinist. Did he ever teach Maid Marian to look after herself, or did he always rush to the rescue? Good old white boy. But instead of focusing on the fact this guy is obviously a terrible criminal with very dubious morality, we teach the story to our kids. What is wrong with you people? But we talk about his honour, his courage, his sense of fun, his loyalty to his friends, his devotion to this woman. We read these stories with nuance. And when we come to Joshua and Judges, often we're like, oh, the archaeology doesn't quite line up. Killing everybody that moves? Oh, it's a bit icky, right? We can read our stories with nuance. Let's read the stories of the people of Israel with nuance. Let's understand that maybe they weren't written to us, they're written in different genres, the ancient Near Eastern conquest genre. Very, very clear, very well attested, very, very consistent with what we read in Joshua. Let's, not impose our expectations on the text, but meet it where it is. Read it with nuance, just as we do read the stories of criminals with nuance. Paul tells us that these stories were written not to tell us what the weather conditions were like when Joshua marched on Jericho, not to give us those historical facts, times and dates and places that we expect with our history, our culture. No, they're there to encourage us, to give us hope, to show us what faith in action looks like, how God works with people against all expectations. We need to suspend judgment and our cultural expectation, meet the text where it is. Even after the book of Joshua was written, very few people would have had access to, a written text. Even, and I know this is shocking, even the King James was in short supply. The average family, deprived of basic essential human necessities like Wi-Fi and Netflix, would have to talk to each other. Awkward. And the stories that shaped them, right, were the stories that we're reading in Joshua and Judges. Now, every story follows a pattern, a framework. There's the element of the familiar and the element of surprise, and those things are important in bringing out the message and the lesson that God is giving to us. Telling stories around the family fire, chewing over these things is an important part of discipleship. Now, we've got a whole week that we've set aside. We've got opportunities to sit around the imaginary campfire here, maybe on the lawns of Peterson's, maybe in a cafe, maybe as we're going for walks through the waterfalls, whatever. It's a mindset. It's how God designed us to talk about these stories, to see the new and the novel, to apply and to reinterpret. So we know the basic story. We know the basic story. It's one of surprise and salvation. Thank you. The basic story, don't have 2 coffees before you speak. The basic story is pretty straightforward, right? 2 men come to a city on the Jordan Plain. They arrive in late afternoon. The city goons turn up, try and find them. The righteous person shelters them in her house. The righteous person ends up saving their entire family, even though they're probably the only righteous one. And then the city gets burned with fire. And then, sadly, someone who actually is saved ends up getting destroyed. But wait, Dad, you told us that story a few nights ago. That's the story of Lot. Yeah, kids, it is. But it's also the story of Rahab. Why? Well, because God tells stories the same sort of way. And God is making a point to us, right? Because I think that comparison's pretty solid. You've got Lot and you've got Rahab, and they're both the same. It's the same story, except one, of course, is Abraham's nephew, and he's a righteous man, and the other one is a Canaanite prostitute. But God lines them up and says, hey, look at this. These 2 people are the same, but they're not the same, are they? Because Rahab saves her whole family, and Lot ends up in disgrace. So we're thinking about the story around the campfire, and we're going, wow, Rahab is actually, she's more than Lot. Isn't Scripture amazing? There's no accidents in Scripture. And the way that these stories are presented to us, the patterns and the surprise and the twists, I think just, for me, is one of the powers of Scripture. And you just see inspiration, you go, incredible. We don't have time, we're not even going to touch all the comparisons between Rahab's story and Passover, because there's a ton of things happening there. But God clearly is aligning her with Lot. But there's another comparison that I want to look at, another comparison that the record places in front of us. 2 people. After the fall of Jericho, no one knows that there's going to be a problem in the near future. Ironically, in chapter 6, Joshua 6, verse 25, Rahab is placed outside the camp. She's a dangerous woman. She's unclean. She's, all of these things. Keep her outside. She might be dangerous. But the problem that was going to face Israel wasn't a dangerous woman outside the camp, was it? It was a man inside the camp. It was a respectable figure, a man of pedigree, a man who belonged in the camp of Israel, but he had a dirty little secret, Achan. The second person we meet, really, in the book of Joshua is Achan. And he causes Israel to lose the battle at Ai. What a bizarre way to start a book of victory and conquest. We start off by saving a Canaanite prostitute, and we go straight from there to losing a battle because of a traitor. This is not the way I would write the book of Joshua. I don't think any of us would start the book this way. Now, there's a reason, though, for these 2 illustrated examples, I think. If you want to take the promised land, you need to make good choices. And we've got 2 people who are contrasted, who make very different choices. We know Joshua chapter 7, right? Achan stole some gold, some silver, some garments that he found in Jericho, despite the fact it was really clear everything had to be burnt and destroyed. So the master storyteller puts the next story of Achan alongside that of Rahab, but this time it's not a retelling, it's a complete contrast. She's a prostitute, he's actually a war veteran. She's a Canaanite, he's from the leading tribe of Judah. She hides Israel in Jericho, and he hides part of Jericho in the middle of Israel. She's saved with her family from the middle of Jericho, and tragically, Achan is destroyed with his family. She continued in Israel until this day, says Joshua 6, verse 25. A memorial of stones is piled up over the tragically dead bodies of Achan and his family as a memorial. In both the similarities with Lot and the contrast with Achan, we get this wonderful design pattern that emphasizes the lesson. The lesson is we can all make incredible choices But those choices have consequences. Those choices have consequences. And of course, we know ultimately Rahab married into the tribe of Judah, totally replaced Achan, if you like. Let's talk about the whole big context coming into Rahab. In Deuteronomy chapter 30, right, you've gone through the Exodus, we've gone through the wilderness wanderings. Moses gives a farewell speech that if I tried to replicate, you would all be stoning me because it went for way too long, but it happened. Gives the farewell speech, and in chapter 30 he goes, right, here's the point, people. You need to make decisions. You have to obey God. You have to walk in his ways, and you need to be separate from the Canaanites. Don't mix it with those people. Don't follow their gods. Don't socially mix with the locals. You have to be loyal to God, and this is critical. Right? I've set before you life and death. Choose life. There are consequences to making the wrong decisions. Then the Deuteronomist, completes the book of Joshua, and he has Joshua give a farewell speech, which is a carbon copy. Same speech. Carefully obey what's written in the law. Watch out for the nations. Don't go anywhere near their gods. Be separate. Make the right decision. Be loyal to God. It's the same speech. Don't drift into Canaanite ways. Choose God. But the challenge is always, how are we going to act in the moment? Rahab didn't know. She did not have her calendar out and it said, okay, 29th of Abib, or whatever calendar the Canaanites use, 2 spies are going to turn up, make sure you do the right thing. She made a snap decision. Sure, she had thoughts as to, this God of Israel and what it all meant, but opportunity turned up, she wasn't expecting it, and she decides, I'm going all in on the God of Israel. I don't think Achan walked into Jericho with a shopping list. His plastic bags, because he probably recycled and did all the right things. I don't think he did that. He just got there, there was the opportunity, and he made a tragic decision. Just like you and me, opportunities come, good or bad. We need to choose wisely. We need to choose life. Year 11, I had this craziest guy teaching me English that I have ever met. He's still called Zimbabwe Rhodesia, which probably tells you everything you need to know about him. And after we had done the obligatory Shakespeare, Macbeth, because it was the darkest one he could find, we went straight into World War I poetry where the acid was still jumping off the page, and then Soviet gulags. Jack was an interesting character, and probably we all needed therapy afterwards. Lady Macbeth, consumed by guilt. Macbeth himself is ruined, turns from a hero to a monster, plagued with guilt, visions of daggers and ghosts the whole time. She's scrubbing her hands so hard she's probably making them bleed herself. The weight of guilt shapes us. It really is heavy. And probably the worst kind is unconfessed guilt. It is corrosive. It has genuine impact on our lives and on our futures. So we can draw this really light and easy contrast between Rahab and Achan, but it's not that simple. Because our history matters. Our habits, our context, all matters. And Rahab had plenty of history. And we want to just deal into the little grubby bits a little, because the more we think about her history and the choice she made, the more amazing the grace is that we see come to her. Our failures, our past, they can weigh us down, and very few people would have a past more disturbing than Rahab's. In Leviticus 17, God said, look, you've got to go into the land, and the Canaanites and their entire existence can't stand it. And one of the key issues I've got here is the sexual violence, the sexual perversion, and the sexual exploitation, right? It was a sexually ill society, and she's a prostitute in that society, right? She's embodying a lot of and party to a lot of the pretty barbaric practices that were going in. Even Rahab's name is actually a little bit grubby. There's a few variety of opinions, but essentially the consensus seems to revolve around it's something referring to the curves of a woman, if not straight talking about her fertility. A little bit grubby. And when the guards talk to her, the language in the Hebrew, is quite a bit of innuendo going on in her conversation with the guards as to what had been going on in her establishment. Rahab could have continued acting as everyone expected. I mean, we tend to have sympathy for women who are caught in that circumstance today. But in biblical times, a prostitute was predatory, untrustworthy, immoral, dangerous, wicked woman. She could have kept acting in line with her history, in line with expectations, and no one would have been surprised. Or she could seize the opportunity and make a remarkable decision. We can all make decisions despite our history. Rahab certainly did. Now, I am kind of deliberately conflating context here, something which I don't particularly enjoy, but hey, Isaiah 35 has got nothing to do with Rahab, nothing to do with Joshua, but it just demonstrates that God's road to salvation is always inherently unlikely. Flowers bloom in the desert, waters flow in a dry land. The Lord Jesus Christ himself sprung up like a green shoot out of a dead, dry stump. That's how salvation is. It's always unlikely. Israel was warned, don't mingle with the Canaanites. We already covered that. They were told specifically, Deuteronomy 7, several times, go in, get rid of those people. Have nothing to do with them. In fact, extinguish them. And we're told in Joshua 2 that the spies leave from a place called Shittim. Now you sort of go, oh yeah, great, weird name. But the local thing that had just happened, right, in Shittim is that thousands of the men of Israel had been killed because they engaged in spiritual, physical fornication with the women of Moab. Now, if I'm sent out on a mission by Joshua, he's handpicked a couple of blokes. Presumably they're pretty faithful, like he wasn't going to repeat the 12 spies incident. So he's handpicked a couple of guys to go out, do a bit of spying. You'd think he'd pick faithful people. If I'm one of those people, unlikely given the criteria, but if I'm one of those people, the last place I'm going is a prostitute's house. I've just seen what's happened. Don't point at Leanne. I've just seen what happens when you go, and you consort with the women of the land. Totally unlikely. But here they are in Rahab's house. So unlikely. But that's how salvation is. And the author has constructed this story with its grubby portrayal of Rahab because an incredible reversal is underway. Because there's a lesson to learn. The book of Joshua and this whole thing, you want to take the promised land? It's not about military encounters. It's not about swinging your sword. It's making the right decisions. It's about being faithful to God, whether you're a Canaanite prostitute or whether you're a war veteran in the tribe of Judah. It doesn't matter what your gender, your history, your social standing, all of that's irrelevant when it comes to taking the promised land. All Rahab had to do was, obey. Hang a little red cord out of the window. Pretty simple stuff. Just deviate for a second. That's a picture of the ruins of Jericho as it is today. Down the bottom, it's never good at this. On the bottom left, you might be able to see a bus and a car park. Anyway, that's a recreation of the city. You can see even in Joshua's time, the visitor centre and car park was there, which is really cool. In verse 15, we read a little detail about Rahab's house, that there's Rahab let them down by a rope in the wall, and then there's this thing in brackets, her house was built as part of the city wall. She lived in the wall because the final compiler, editor, whatever, of the book of Joshua just needs to put in this explanatory note because they didn't use walls, houses, as part of the city wall by the time of 750 BC when the modern readers came into the story. Anyway, that's just by the by. That seemed to jump a little bit further than I thought. No, it didn't. All good. While we're on extensions from the story, Rahab, with her father, her mother, her brothers, kids, nephews, we don't know how many people, right? They had to stay in the house. That was part of the salvation covenant that was made with her. Now, if you think through the history, that's an odd choice, right? Because what happens is the spies go back home, eventually they take their time getting there. Then you have this whole process of crossing the River Jordan, which takes time because they have to clean themselves up. Then they cross the river. Then they go and camp at Gilgal. All the men get circumcised, and that takes a little while to recover from. A few odd faces in the audience. Rahab's got 3 weeks, 2 weeks? She has got plenty of time. So the plan is, Rahab, stay here for 5 days and then go on a business trip to Gath. Plenty of time, no suspicion, easy. But no, God says, I want you, by the spies, I want you to stay in place. Now I'm going to do the whole campfire thing, right? I'm going to cheat a bit with the story because There was no reference to Fred Barling, who's the guy on the screen there in this story. But stories around the campfire are made to be extended, made to be applied in new ways that are relevant. The words that are up there are from a preface from the Endeavour magazine. Sister Joy Barling wrote it after Fred died. The full quote goes like this. Some of the many who disagreed with the treatment of Ralph Lovelock, 1960s argument about evolution, felt that it made it impossible for them to remain in the community, and they left. Though Fred shared their feelings, he remained. He would say, "I found Christ through the Christadelphian community, and he repaid with loyalty." A lot of people will hit a point where the temptation is to make a run for it. To exit, find another way. Now, I can't speak to your circumstances, and there are times when geography makes options difficult. Thankfully, technology does span some distance. I thought pretty long and hard about bailing. I had people I thought were friends tell me to bail. I had to change congregation. I had that option. And if it wasn't for Halifax Street, there's a lot of hay fever around at the moment. Sorry. Ooh, thank you. If Halifax Street hadn't bravely opened their doors and taken the arrows that came as a result, I don't know where I'd be. These words of Fred's really, really resonate with me. We don't believe in Christianity, we believe in Christ. Perhaps Jesus has a reason for us being in this house. Maybe not today. Maybe he wants us here for 5 or 10 years from now. Who knows? But if we found Christ here, maybe we should stay in the house. And I really appreciate that can be very hard at times. But I think there's a lot of wisdom in what Fred said. Really is extending the story because that's not in Joshua 2. What's the chances of the kingdom invitation coming to you, of me getting the gospel? I mean, it's about as likely as spies coming from Shittim, of all places, to Rahab's house. I'm sure you have had similar experience to me. I work with people, some people I've worked with over the years, whose integrity, whose generosity just puts me to shame. And you think, why? Why me? And that's incredibly common. We can't let that be a barrier, siblings, to faith. One way or another, for whatever reason, in his wisdom, Jesus has given us the opportunity. And asking why me, that's normal. David did it. He sat down after he got the promises and he said, why? Why my house? Why me? Why should I get this? Peter, when the Lord did the miracles in Luke 5, he says, "Go away from me, Lord, I'm a sinful man. I'm just not worthy." It's a normal reaction for us to feel that way. We don't come to Jesus to remember him because we're perfect, but because he believes he can perfect us, and we accept that. Rahab was the lowest of the low, right? She's a marginal woman in this irrelevant, marginal town, living on the outskirts even of that, on the city wall, part of the city wall. But she's saved, not Achan, not the person with connections and family and all the things. Rahab the prostitute. Now, I'm not saying that to make ourselves to be better than her. Just to point out that God reaches people. No one's beyond that reach. We just need to make the choice like Rahab made. And we might think, well, I'm not perfect. Oh, really? No duh. Hebrews 11 and James 2 hold up Rahab as like this paragon of faith, this example of faith, of how this works. And two things to say, obviously, what an incredible turnaround. Prostitute 1 minute, faithful the next. That's important because it says that our history is irrelevant. The past is prologue, says, as Shakespeare says in the Tempest. She could have turned the spies away at the door. She could have sold them to the city guard and got some cash or improved her reputation or whatever. She had all those options, but she went all in. And in an instant, all the past was irrelevant. She was now a servant of God, loyal to him. Faith is making the right snap decision, going all in. And that's the only thing that matters, our next decision. The second thing, a central part of the story, is actually Rahab's lie. right? Now, deception's a critical part of any spy story, right? Imagine you spend your readies, you go down to see the latest James Bond film, and it says at the start, there will be no deception in this thing. He walks up to the guards, and they're like, who are you? Bond, James Bond. What are you here for? Well, I'm going to steal all the secrets, get away with the girl, and do an incredibly, impossible car chase. And they go, no, you're not. Bang. And credits roll. It'd be a really boring story if he told the truth. That's not how spy stories work. We get that, right? But there's a weird thing going, right? Because she lies. And that's a critical part of her act of faith. Now, we've got Calvin on the screen. I'll read the whole thing. As to the falsehood, we have to admit it was done for a good purpose, but it wasn't free from fault. It can never be lawful to lie because it's contrary to the nature of God. I kind of agree with him on that. And God is truth. And people twist themselves in knots trying to explain this other ways. I think Calvin's right, just straightforward. God is truth. It can't ever really be right to lie. And still, the act of Rahab is not devoid of the praise of virtue. If we translate that into English, she did a good thing. Although it was not spotlessly pure, as often happens when the saints study to hold the right path, they deviate to circuitous courses. Again, in English, we try and do the right thing, we still mess it up. I agree with Calvin on this, right? And I want to highlight it like odd English and all, because I think it's really a wonderful, wonderful point. Rahab's in Hebrews 11 as a faithful person, and yet she lied. And God's like, don't care. That is faithful. God is far more generous to us than we are to ourselves sometimes. We might do something and think, but I didn't do it quite right. I did in the heat of the moment, I kind of said the right thing, but then I kind of fibbed as well. And we're like beating up on ourselves. God's like, no, faithful act. I'll take that. That's my kind of person. That's one of my people. So what? That her virtuous act, her faithful decision, wasn't spotlessly pure. God's far more generous to us than we can be to ourselves sometimes, and each other. Our yesterdays don't define us, neither do the fact that sometimes our stumbling imperfections aren't spotless. God can call an action faithful, even if we consider it a little flawed. Rahab's good choices against all the odds had a happy ending. Despite anything that she could have done, she made the right decision. She was saved because of her living faith. Nothing else mattered. Her past, people's expectations, the storyline of Joshua, the fact that he showed a little fib on the way through, didn't matter. She was saved along with her family. She becomes part of the family of the Lord Jesus Christ. Side point, that picture took a long time for me to find. Can you actually read it? Yeah, you kind of can. Search Google, couldn't find what I wanted. Pulled out my old King James, couldn't find it there. Then on a whim I thought, I wonder. I went and dug up Sarah's Bible, her old King James. Sure enough, she'd coloured in one thing and one thing only. The 4 women who formed part of Christ's genealogy. It's almost as if women read the Bible a bit different. Incredible. Tamar, Ruth, Bathsheba, Rahab. All of them Gentile women, all of them with a whiff of sexual scandal about it, but none of that matters because they are faithful. Their scars didn't limit them. Society's expectations, demands, and judgment didn't matter a whit. They were faithful. And they're included in the family of Christ. All 4 played an essential role. One of my favourite passages, 1 John chapter 2 through to 3 verse 1. Little children, remain in him. Rahab's not the only one in Jesus' family. We're all God's children. What defines us is not our social status, it's not our wealth, our genealogy, how many years a Christadelphian, or not our scars, none of that. None of that matters. Our past struggles, the corrosive burden of guilt we may have carried, sometimes that scary bad history, doesn't matter. Are we going to abide in Jesus? Are we going to hang on and shelter in place? Are we going to go all in when that moment comes and make the decision that we're going to serve him? Are we going to try and practice righteousness? Oh, it won't be spotless, but are we going to give it a red hot go? God has set before us life and death. We know what he wants us to choose. Despite all expectation and probability, he's brought us to this point, given us the opportunity. We just need to choose life.